So this IGN video was very not well received. 800 likes, 500 dislikes. Jesus. That's real bad. Ooh, that's super bad. Ooh, why though? Well, let's find out. Yellow paint in video games needs to stop. It's time to stop. Oh.
If you've played a video game in the last decade, there's a good chance that you've bore witness to an infectious plague, a dreaded epidemic that spread faster than the T-virus, a rat tsunami, or even cordyceps.
Oh.
I, of course, can only be referring to one thing.
What's that?
The relentless,
microtransactions.
Merciless, and unforgiving yellow paint.
They were all yellow.
And I'm not the only one who's noticed either. The internet has lit up in response to bucket loads of canary being splashed all over our favourite game worlds. And no mantle point, ladder, or breakable object is
Stalker
safe.
has this.
But how has this trend happened? And, more importantly, what can we do to stop it? I got a lead UI designer and creator of the game UI database to help make sense of this yellow madness, and hopefully provide an alternative solution.
Well, look, he's doing it in his own video. What a hypocrite. Look at that. So now you know where to look where the guy is. It's showing it right there.
An alternative solution to the glossy paint assault.
Why would everything be painted yellow? Who's doing this?
Let's go solve this mystery.
The yellow paint complaint isn't a new argument, but the last couple of years have seen it rise to prominence. Both 2023's Resident Evil 4 and 2024's Final Fantasy VII Rebirth
that's pretty
stoked
extreme.
the online debate, with everyone from your average gamers to AAA developers getting involved. The trope of
That is pretty funny. On my way to Vegas for DICE, I'll just follow the NPC with the yellow backpack. Clearly, he's guiding me.
using lashings of yellow paint to guide players along their journey had been well and truly highlighted then, and I wrongly assumed that we'd likely seen the end of it. That was until I began playing A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead. What started out as a surprisingly decent adaptation of the popular movie series with an interesting take on Alien Isolation's hunter gameplay system was quickly tainted when I began to notice ungodly amounts of the yellow stuff in every interactable area you could imagine. Mantle surfaces, markings for where planks of wood had to be dropped, and even a placement area for a crate of beer, seriously, were all covered.
That's a lot. That's a lot. That's pretty bad.
I went from moderately enjoying my
Jesus.
time with the game to once again obsessing about a developer's UI decisions.
What is wrong?
Am I crazy for not even considering this as like a real legitimate problem? And I think this is like one of these like weird gamer ego nitpick things that people don't really care about. Because like I don't really think this is that big of a deal at all. It's annoying. Well, so this is, I think, the truth. I think yellow paint is necessary for video games, but not in the form of yellow paint. So there's a term in gaming, it's called signposting, which is when you indicate certain things to the player by having the game be designed visually in a certain way. So a good example of this is like in Dark Souls 1, every single ladder in Blighttown is next to a torch. What really fundamentally is the difference between torches and yellow paint? Well, I think the difference is that one is original and the other one is copy pasta from every other video game, and it removes escapism. Because when you see yellow paint in a video game, it reminds you that you are in a video game, right? It takes you out of the world that you're in, and you're now thinking, oh, this is where I'm supposed to go. It damages immersion. So I think that actually, like, yellow paint in essence is not only good, but it is necessary. But yellow paint in its exact form is boring, overused, and in fact, I think in a lot of cases, what's the word? It's basically a placeholder for better design. It's like, okay, we don't know how to make players be able to notice this normally, so we're just going to give it the generic video game indicator, so that way they'll just do it anyway. It's lazy. Yeah, basically it's lazy. It's lazy. Yeah, it's a crutch, a cop-out. Exactly, yeah.
With me.
Side note here, you can actually disable the paint in the options, but by default the game is covered in yellow gunk.
It's such a ridiculous thing. It shouldn't, like, do you guys see what I'm saying? Like, this entire dynamic shouldn't even exist in the first. It's stupid. It's so stupid.
So it feels fair game. I really hoped that A Quiet Place would be the fluorescent finale for the trope. And then, well, Stalker 2 arrived. And although not as egregious as A Quiet Place, it too is very liberal with the amount of magical guiding yellow muck it lashes all around its world. Yellow paint then, it appears, is here to stay.
Sick of this. I'm sick of all of this.
I'm gonna be honest, like, I played Stalker 2 and I feel like the amount of that never really impacted my experience because it's really only for ladders, and otherwise that game doesn't really hold your hand hardly at all. I don't even, I never noticed. Exactly, it's really just for ladders. Like, it's nothing. I like some guidance. Well, it's also that, and this is an issue where you have a lot of the same visuals in the game, and so it can be harder for a player to, like, immediately discern what a visual is. So, like, for example, when you look at a game like Stalker 2 that has, like, you know, things that are approaching photorealism, and then you compare that to, like, Breath of the Wild or, like, Genshin Impact, these are two very different styles of games. And, like, so the way that you make a ladder in one game is very different, and it blends in with the environment in a completely different way.
But why? I needed answers from someone who knew exactly why developers turn to yellow paint time and time again. And so I got in touch with UI designer Ed Coates to find out more.
It really is this sort of like Darwinistic kind of cycle where if it's successful, it will carry on being used. It's one of those cases where a lot of people are now noticing it, and because they notice it, it's annoying them.
Ed is a lead UI designer at Radical Forge, developers of Southfield and Brightpaw. Ed is also the creator of Game UI Database, a free resource for UI and UX designers to search for reference material and inspiration. UI, UX, what does this all mean to the average gamer though?
I think that the majority of focus around this kind of stuff is the amount of over-design and the amount of, like, modern thinking with UIs, I think, is completely fucking garbage. And I think that this is something where, like, people make a mountain out of a molehill. And if you look at games with really bad UIs in some cases, or like UIs that kind of like break some rules, like a good example of this is like Metaphor ReFantagio. Like, they have an incredibly abstract, like very avant-garde UI, right? For like just the way the whole game is. And I think that that makes the game more of a transcendent experience and it adds to the immersion. But I think that trying to, like, you know, turn this into a science damages that escapism in a big way.
And how does that relate to yellow paint in video games?
What's it all mean? What's the point?
User interface, or UI for short, generally means the interactable graphic design that you see on pause menus, skill trees, button prompts, and other similar things. User experience, or UX, on the other hand, broadly refers to taught gameplay behaviors that help you progress through a game's environment.
I played this one.
Yellow paint, annoyingly for clarity's sake, sits somewhere between the two.
Yeah, sure.
The lines are so blurry between everything. It's not as simple and cut and dry as just like UX being behavior and UI being menus buttons. It's basically a solution to a problem. Because that problem can be solved either in a menu or diegetically in the world itself, whatever we do in the world itself can also be considered a form of UI. A friend of mine once said UIX, and I think I'm sort of inclined to agree with that.
Sounds good to me.
It's hard to pinpoint exactly when yellow paint started in video games. All signs largely point to a slow, evolutionary process dating back to the glowing yellow weak spots trend of the mid-2000s.
We've always had this. It's been in video games forever. Back in the 90s video games, when a boss would be low health, they would start flashing red. We've all played games that were like this. Like, there's a million examples of this, of it happening, and yellow paint is just a permutation of it. It's not like this is like, or Zelda, right? When they get low health, Mario coins or anything like that. Red barrels, yes. We've always had this. This isn't anything new or bad.
But But it's unquestionable that, since its relative recent wave of popularity, yellow paint has then become a de facto solution to an important game design problem. How do you encourage...
I'm gonna be real, like, I feel like if you need an indicator right here, like, if you can't figure this one out, you should just, like, this should be, I mean, like, you need a form of natural selection at a certain point. Like, if you can't figure out to go up that fucking, come on, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? This is crazy.
How do you encourage or highlight the direction a player needs to go?
We need to have some way of teaching the player thing. But in many, many cases, they do try loads and loads of different things. They go through like numerous testing sessions with players. I've been to these offices where they have like a cinema screen and they watch rigorous tests, you know, to make sure that they play the game properly. They would have basically done numerous tests and then found like, okay, we really do need to just paint these ladders yellow to make sure that players know.
Yeah.
Please don't go this way.
There would have been one or two situations in the game where they had to point it out because people were missing the ladder. And there would have been enough cases like that where basically they were like, okay, we've started this language of like yellow paint equals you can climb this or you can smash this or whatever.
Yeah.
So because we've done it in enough cases, we now need to do it everywhere because if people see the yellow paint, they're going to think, oh, we can climb it. And if they don't see the yellow paint...
Yeah, it becomes like a universal language, like a universal indicator. Kind of like how the power button is always like the circle with the line in it.
Think, oh, we can't climb it. There are upsides and downsides to everything. You know, if you give people too much information, it's hand-holding.
Simplifies the game mechanic. Yeah, it does.
It becomes difficult. The key thing is to make sure it makes sense in the narrative. The reason why yellow paint's ridiculous is because it's like, why would everything be painted yellow? Who's doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
And with this point, Ed arrives at the crux of my issue. A problem that can only become
lazy.
more exacerbating as gaming progresses further into the realms of realism. How can I truly be immersed when the UIX element is diametrically opposed to that goal?
Help me to understand this shit.
Everyone hates UI because it's like this reminder that you're playing a video game. Diegetic UI can play into the narrative. Faith in Mirror's Edge, for example, she sees things in red and we say that's runner vision. Other patterns like that all throughout UI. So like the red barrel, for example, we never question that. We never question why a barrel...
Fucking exactly, yes. If you see a red barrel in a video game, it blows up. If you see a green barrel in a video game, it's full of poison. It's that simple. Everybody knows this. Yes, of course. And that makes sense, though, right? Because fire is red. It's intuitive because it makes sense and it's congruent with the real world. I've seen a lot of ladders in my life. I don't think that yellow ladders are any more common than any other color of ladder. Yeah, green is acid.
Red,
exactly, yes. Boom.
Weak spots on enemies, we never question, like, what's the evolutionary benefit of a weak spot? You know, they have a big glowing spot on their body, which is also the spot that happens to be where they take the most damage. Why would they have that?
Well, it's like, and this is the problem really with a lot of these UI features, is like, you look at this UI, holy fuck, this is awful. Like, this looks like I swear to God, there are phone games that have more tasteful UIs than this. It's incredible.
But they're there to guide the player, they're there to help the players. It's impossible to do this in a subtle way, but because you want to teach a pattern, if you add yellow paint to this one section of the game, you kind of want to do it throughout the entire game in order to make that consistent pattern, that kind of language that you're teaching the player. That yellow paint equals go here, you know, kind of thing.
Come with me if you want to live.
For a player to learn a pattern and minimize any moments of confusion, consistency and regularity with the visual language is key.
Of course.
Reading between the lines, it appears that Ed's argument is that a player's painless experience is often more important than a constant state of immersion. If a healthy...
I do think that he's right about that. And it's better for players to see the yellow paint and not get lost rather than see it and be like, oh, okay, that's what it is. I think that the amount of people that actually complain about yellow paint, it's a very small amount of people. But what I think that the complaint is indicative of a larger problem, which is usually games that have yellow paint. In a lot of cases, it's because they didn't think of anything more creative. And I think, like, you know, for example, it's like an indicator. It's like if you can't be creative enough to explain to the player where to go, there's also a high probability that you can't be creative enough in order to make the game good. It's just logic, right?
balance between
Not
the
always,
two isn't possible,
but
then
in
a
some
frictionless experience is the priority.
Give us a toggle.
But unlike the alternative,
I don't think that there should be a toggle. I think this is maybe I'm like crazy, but like that just it sounds insane. Like you're gonna make a toggle for this.
perhaps smarter, subtle scratches on mantle objects, or the explosive red barrels that we've been shooting at for decades. What began as a design choice to almost subconsciously guide the player has now become so
Not enough people that want
unbelievably
it.
conscious that it was hard for the internet to ignore.
Yeah.
Follow the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. Follow, 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 follow
Yep.
the yellow brick road.
So, what's the solution? Now that yellow paint has become the butt of UIX design jokes, what can developers do that's different?
New solutions are coming up all the time. Like God of War did the kind of tribal patterns etched into the rock. Uncharted, you know, they've managed that without yellow paint. But the thing is about those solutions, they take a hell of a lot of time to perfect.
He's exactly right. That's exactly what I've been saying. Yes. The reason why they don't want to do that is because it takes more time and work, and it's easier to just use the industry standard default placeholder item. That's the reason why. Yep, there you go. Common
Because
sense.
You're literally talking like a bespoke piece of scenery for every single climbable wall. One of the best ways of teaching something to the players, rather than telling them to do something, you can breadcrumb them to get them to that place. So you can basically use contrast. So you can use
Look
like
at that.
a landmark in the background, for example, to draw their eye, and that will work as like a sort of beacon.
Yep.
The church in Breath of the Wild at the very start, you know, rather than have like a big arrow, be like, go here. You didn't need that because you have this landmark that's
It's
just
fucking
sitting
obvious. It's so fucking, it's massive right there. Like you open up Elden Ring and you immediately know what the hell's going on. It's, oh, look at the yellow. You see that yellow guy on the horse? Oh, he's not so good, huh? That's it. You immediately know it too. Lazy devs. Yep, there you go.
there, and the player is always going to go to
Camera
that
pan did
landmark.
the job,
People
yeah.
are going to have to adapt because obviously it's annoying people now, and that's not going to go away. You can't use yellow paint and then also be surprised when people go on Twitter and be like, it's back.
This brings me back
Yeah.
to A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead, and to a lesser extent Stalker 2. After Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and another intense round of mocking, I thought gaming was finally done with yellow paint.
No.
But once again, the played out, but
No,
admittedly
they're always going to do something like this because it's just easy to do. And also, here's the real truth. A lot of people that play video games are really stupid. So you have to make sure that it's like, hey, retard, hey, over here. Oh, nope, you're running into the wall again. No, come back over here. And like, I'm one of those people. Like, this is the best way that I can explain my thinking process. The way that my logic and rationalizations work is not congruent with the way that the video game designer thinks about things. So like, this is what happens with a lot of games, is that I run up against like these problems that I just can't understand why it's not this way, because it just makes perfect sense for it to be this way, but it's not that way. So you just get stuck in like this basically, you're like stuck in the spot. You don't know where to go, right? You have no idea. And so what the fuck? Yeah, no, I'm being serious, right? And what happens is that, yeah, same. Yeah, and I think that's what happens with a lot of people. And so people just, they can't even, because there's a lot of different ways of thinking about something, right? It's like, how do you get to the number 4? You can do, 2 + 2 or 5 - 1. But if you ask a lot of people, the first thing they're going to say is 2 + 2. And so the point is that if a game's development is not intuitive to a player, and I think this is one element, you know what game really did this well? I hate to say it, because we all know it was rigged. But Astrobot did this extremely well. It was so good. I didn't need to fucking worry about it. It was fucking obvious, right? It was so fucking obvious. And it's done in a way that doesn't require yellow paint. It's just common sense. The game was simple as hell, though. I think that there are a lot of like physical interactions. So like, for example, okay, there's like a big thing and you need to pull it. Okay, so you get your hand, then you move your character back, right? There are things that make like kinetic logical sense. And I think that that's really what the issue is with a lot of these games, is that sometimes video games have logic that defies reality. And then when video games have logic defying, or like reality defying like logical jumps, what happens is that players get really confused because they don't know, okay, well, they can't, how can they think in the concept and the mindset of this developer? It's very hard to do. So I think that what happens with a lot of these games is that they end up defaulting to this because a lot of players, and I think it's really, really hard. Like, here's a great example of it too. The fact that a 5-year-old can use a smartphone doesn't mean that 5-year-olds are smart. It means the people that made the smartphone are really fucking smart. So making something easy to use and approachable for a lot of people is incredibly challenging and really hard. And I think that's the reason why you have so many people defaulting to yellow paint, because it's just not a priority for them. And then there's game logic, which is different but familiar. Yeah, exactly. Like, there's a lot of game logic that for me is just never intuitive. Like, and I don't know if you guys, anybody's like this as well, but like, to me, a lot of the way that video games are designed, and like, this is just the way that people think to me, is so like just unfathomably counterintuitive that I would have never thought to do it this way, and it makes no sense to me. And so it's so hard for me to be able to like figure out what to do in certain situations or like think like somebody else, because I would just never do that. Could you give an example? Yeah, sure. The first example, the one that comes immediately to mind, is that Blast Blight is not an element in Monster Hunter World. This is counter to every logical conclusion that I could possibly draw and every observable reality that I've ever experienced. It's a status, yeah, still. Well, that's what I'm saying, right? The Blast Blight arc? Yeah, no, but that's my point. And so that's one example of something that I would never even comprehend this to be different. It's Blight, but not elemental. Well, what I'm saying is that doesn't make sense to me. That's my whole point, is that you can explain the reasoning, but if the reasoning doesn't have an intuitive resonance that is like, you know, there's like a counterbalance to it with like reality, people aren't going to understand that. Like, I understand that there's a difference now because I looked it up in the game, but I would have never intuitively understood that because it's counter to any logic or thinking that I would have. And I think that a lot of other people that play video games think like that too. The toggle on your guide mode? Yeah, exactly. It's confusing since it's not explained? Yeah. At least not immediately? Yeah. And so remember that for Wilds? Oh yeah, for sure. And so anyway, you lost 70% intuitive resonance. Well, what I'm saying is like, this is, I think yellow paint is a result of that. It's a response to that.
Useful trope reared its ugly yellow head.
I think it definitely was a mistake to use the yellow paint, because this is the thing about design patterns as well, right? The more that solution is used, the more the player knows what that solution is.
Yeah.
But obviously that can have a downside and an upside. You know, it can make things really, really obvious, or it can basically just be like, oh, not this again.
This landscape.
I think also one thing that it does is it takes discovery away from the player. If the player, because like when you have like unique signposting for an individual game, and it's like, for example, like the torches in Blighttown, when the player has like that moment where they realize, wait a minute, all the torches here, oh shit, okay, now I get it, right? They've just learned something. And so like when a player learns something like that, they're going to remember it for a long time and they feel like they've accomplished something. But when you just see like the default setting that's put on there, then yeah, it's a totally different situation. It's a game on rails. Yeah, exactly.
I could swear I've seen it before.
Because once you notice it and you know why it's there, it's like, it is jarring and you want to be immersed.
It's still real to me, damn it!
If the discourse carries on, it will just disappear. If now we know that yellow paint is basically the devil and people hate it, then the least we can do is, you know, make it blue.
I don't think that developers, if you don't have time to make the game in like an intuitive way, you should use yellow paint. Because it's better that players understand what's going on than not. The idea that like it's a bad idea, it's just silly. Like there's not even like, Yeah, of course you need to indicate to players what to do, and it's better to use the default than nothing.
You never know where help is going to come from until you look for it.
It appears then that the days of yellow paint guiding us down critical paths are numbered, hopefully destined to the history of gaming design tropes, along with instant fail stealth missions and slowly walking while talking.
Jesus.
But it won't be long before the new yellow paint arrives, because as games become increasingly complex and detailed, developers will always need to create new and clever methods to optimize our experience.
Jesus,
and
I
when
cannot
something
wait
new
for this
works,
game.
patterns will be established and others will quickly follow.
You gotta keep moving forward. We will beat this.
So yes, although it'll be annoying when we all collectively notice, perhaps instead we should take joy in all the painless hours of video games we experienced before we did.
Well, my work is done here.
What do you mean your work is done? You didn't do anything.
Didn't I?
Now, on to my next gripe. Squeezing through small gaps. Let's get rid of that.
So dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
Am I the only person who, like, I don't spurg out about little stuff like this? It's not that big of a deal to me. Like, I don't have this same fixation of, like, attention to detail for this. Like, I don't give a fuck about this. Yeah, it's annoying. I mean, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
And if you like that video and are interested in learning more about game design, why not check out Art of the Level, our series where we deep dive into the development process behind things like Cyberpunk's most terrifying mission and the important Modern Warfare level that changed Call of Duty forever. And for everything else the history of game design, be sure to stick with IGN.
Yeah, a lot of people were pretty negative about this. I don't really know why. I think this video is actually pretty decent. But I do think that yellow paint is just an indicator of basically a developer not prioritizing or not having time or not having the intuitive understanding enough to make a type of explaining in the game that makes sense to an average player. Yeah, lack of critical thinking. Yeah, exactly, right? It's shitty, lazy design. It is. It's lazy design. And I think that it's not even really that shitty in some ways. It's just lazy. I think it's less of a problem on its own, but when you play a game with hand-holding, the satisfaction of solving something is greater. Yeah, without hand-holding? No, you're definitely right. And I think that that's one thing that yellow paint does take away, is that if you have an indicator everywhere that is like a uniform thing across all video games, and it says this is the way that every video game is supposed to play, what ends up happening is that there's like a degree of like discovery that the player can't have. You can't discover something that's already been discovered for you. And I think that's it. Yeah, there's no thinking involved. And I think that like there's like a sweet spot where you give the player enough of like a lead to understand what to do or where to go, but you don't necessarily do it for them. People are calling it lazy, like the devs have infinite time to make every game. Well, I think they're just giving their feedback on it, right? They're saying like, well, we want more creative solutions because we feel like this is boring and it takes away the escapism, right? And like, I don't think yellow paint is like a really big deal in video games. I actually don't. But I think that it's one annoyance that people have with modern gaming. And I think there's a reason why they're annoyed by it. It's part of the experience. Yeah, it is. Did Death Stranding have paint? I don't know. I didn't play Death Stranding. Yeah, he literally said if you don't have the time, do the yellow paint. Yeah, exactly. Why rush, though? Make a good game that takes time. I mean, that's always because there's money involved, right? Like, I mean, if you're running a studio and, like, the truth is, this is the reality, yellow paint will probably not be the reason why your game doesn't sell well. If you make a really good game, yellow paint's presence or lack thereof will probably not be the reason why it fails or succeeds. So that's the main reason. I mean, it's easy to say, but, we'll just make it take longer. Well, but that's hard to do. Who said, why rush? What a comment. Yeah, exactly. It's such a bad excuse saying that they don't have infinite time because there are tons of successful games out there that implement intuitive discovery well. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it should be more of a goal, because again, it's about the player experience, and that's what matters the most, right?